really a lot of drama right now between Pat Riley, this organization, and a superstar that's led them to 2 NBA finals. What the hell is going on in Miami right now?
Look, the Miami situation is fascinating, and it's really just in the last week, the steps, the response from each side. It was the day after Christmas that Pat Riley came out with a very pointed statement and said, normally we don't address this kind of stuff, but it's become a distraction to our team. We are not trading Jimmy Butler. A very strong on-the-record statement from Pat Riley. The question immediately became, how would Jimmy Butler respond to that statement? Would he just start playing again with Miami and just try to be business as usual? Or would there be some resistance from Jimmy Butler? And we obviously got our answer last night, second half of the back-to-back. The Heat lose listlessly again, and Jimmy Butler was asked, can you recapture your joy as a member of a Heat? And he said, probably not. I mean, that was a pretty strong public statement on his behalf. And now the next day, the Heat just, you don't see teams issue 7-game suspensions. This is a team-issued suspension. So it just kind of shows you, like, Miami is not backing down. I mean, they've put it all out in the open now. They've acknowledged that Jimmy Butler wants a trade, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Miami is just going to make the first trade they can to resolve this. And that's why this is going to be such a unique situation to monitor, because you can make a really strong case that Miami is better off under any circumstances, whether they trade Jimmy Butler or let him walk in free agency. You can make the case they're better off waiting till the offseason no matter what. And if the Heat stick to that stance to wait until the offseason, what happens when this 7-game suspension is over? A lot of people are jumping to the conclusion that Jimmy Butler has played his last game in Miami, but it's not that simple because of the player participation policy. The new player participation policy says that teams are not allowed. We used to see in the past when a team and a player hit an impasse like this, that the team and the player would just basically leave the team and go wait for a trade. With the player participation policy, that is not supposed to happen anymore. But there is like a special circumstances clause in that player participation policy. So it's going to be really interesting to see if this 7-game suspension is served, where the parties are, because there's not going to be a trade that quick. There's just, when you talk to people around the league, there is no easy deal for Miami to make with Jimmy Butler. And so if this 7-game suspension is served and there is no trade, what happens next? Does Miami try, and look, we've seen it with the Clippers. PJ Tucker has been away from the Clippers, and that was by mutual consent, and the league has okayed that one. But by the letter of this new player participation policy, a player is not supposed to be sent away from his team to wait for a trade. And again, Miami, the talk for weeks, really for months, has been Jimmy Butler possesses this player option for next season at $52 million and change. And all the talk has been that Jimmy Butler's intentions are to bypass that player option and go to free agency in the summer. If he sticks to that plan, Miami would realize a lot of financial flexibility by just letting Jimmy Butler walk. And the Heat might deem that more attractive than making a trade and taking back contracts that they don't want. So this thing still has many, many chapters to play out. I know I just went through a ton there. It's a long-winded answer, but this thing has that many chapters. There is just a ton going on here, and it's not like we're on the brink of a resolution.
It's a pretty messy situation, Mark, because Jimmy Butler obviously is a great player, but he's getting up there in age. He may or may not be a free agent. And if he becomes a free agent, he's going to want a huge, huge contract, which for a guy his age is obviously going to be pretty complicated to do. And right now, most of the really, really good teams that are going for it in the league that would trade for a guy like that are above the first apron or maybe into the second apron. And so it's almost impossible to even put together a trade. Like the Mavs have more financial flexibility, for example, than a lot of their competitors in the West right now. And it's almost impossible for them to put a trade together for Jimmy, let alone a team like Denver or Phoenix,
maybe Golden State.
Yeah, Golden State. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces there. And so it's almost like, I mean, it would kind of be it'd be a big headache to just make the math work, let alone assume the risk of an aging player on an potentially expiring contract who has had, let's be honest, a lot of toxic, unceremonious exits from past teams. Like, it's not like this is a new situation with him. So I'm just trying to envision like the type of team that would want to trade for Jimmy right now.
Yeah, and that's why I think you've seen Miami take these hardline stances, because if Jimmy Butler decides to bypass the player option and become a free agent in the summer, the only team out there projected to have max cap space as we speak is Brooklyn. And Brooklyn, by all accounts, is just starting a rebuild. And the thought of Brooklyn going after a 30-something free agent, it just doesn't fit with what the Nets are looking to do. So Miami is looking at the landscape saying, Jimmy Butler doesn't really have anywhere to go in free agency. He's going to need a sign and trade to go somewhere else. So he's going to need our help. And again, then there's the scenario where Miami is thinking, do we emulate the Clippers and let Jimmy Butler walk like the Clippers did with Paul George? And the Clippers' argument was, okay, we lost Paul George for nothing, which is supposed to be an absolute sin in the NBA. But the Clippers are looking at they're going to get to financial flexibility much faster. And what they decided to do was to make short-term moves, bring in a bunch of really good defenders, including our old friend Derek Jones Jr., and try to keep the team at a good level now, but knowing that by letting Paul George go, they will get to financial flexibility faster to take a big swing in the near-term future. Miami could have that opportunity as soon as this summer if Jimmy Butler indeed bypasses that $52 million player option. Now, something Miami has to account for is what happens if we get to June 29th, which is the deadline for Butler to make his decision. And what if Butler says, you know what, I'm actually going to opt in now to that $52 million. Again, all the messaging up till now has been that he doesn't want to do that, but that's where Butler gets back some leverage. What if he surprises Miami and decides to stay on that contract? But as far as the trade market, the Corellustrator has read this exactly right. The teams that are closest to title contention, it's really, really hard in general to trade for Jimmy Butler. Houston's a team that could do it, but the messaging out of Houston has been consistent, again, not just weeks, for months. The Rockets, A, do not want to make an in-season trade this season. And B, when the Rockets take their next big swing, they want to do it for someone who's closer to the age timeline of all these first-round picks that they have on this roster who are all blossoming and developing nicely. So Houston is adamant that they're not going to be a Jimmy Butler team. I've reported from the start, the Mavericks, even though Jimmy Butler has interest in coming to Dallas, the Mavericks are not going to make a trade pitch for Jimmy Butler. I think of the teams mentioned, Phoenix gets mentioned a lot, but Miami's not going to do a deal with Phoenix. The best Phoenix can offer for Jimmy Butler is Bradley Beal and a 2031 first and 3 seconds. The Miami Heat are not taking Bradley Beal's contract back, as $110 million on it left after this season. The only way the Suns could get Jimmy Butler is if there's a third team willing to take on Bradley Beal and Bradley Beal would have to waive his no trade clause in that case. So Phoenix is extremely unlikely.
Yeah, I'll stop you there. That ain't happening.
There's
That's not
no
gonna happen.
way in hell that happens.
Mark, you know Pat Riley better than I do, but I can't imagine Pat Riley gives a flying F about a 2031 first round pick
right?
either.
Yeah, that's the thing. If they just part ways this summer, if Jimmy indeed says, you know what, I'm passing the player option and I'm going to free agency, the Heat gain back all kinds of flexibility to make moves. And the Heat have shown historically that they, just with a hint of flexibility, they can do damage. I mean, I will never forget the summer of 2019 when they didn't even have $5 million in cap space and found a way to do a sign and trade to get Jimmy Butler out of Philadelphia and to Miami. And like you said, Jimmy Butler has been a sensational player for the Heat. 2 trips to the finals and 1 shot away from a third. So the way this is ending, it looked like Jimmy Butler had found a home in Miami. He'd found an organization that really understood him and was able to get the best out of him. So to see it unravel with the speed we've seen in the last week, it is wild. And like I said, I think it's just starting. Like this is, it would shock people if this just led to some sudden Heat trade. The Heat are not just going to yield to the players' wishes here.
And Jimmy Butler, by the way, with this 7-game suspension, is lighting $2.35 million on fire.
There's something else I did want to throw in there because you mentioned the grievance. And look, the NBPA says it's going to support Jimmy Butler's grievance, which obviously that mechanism is there. But in truth, what typically happens in these cases, it's only to address the financial part. It's to try to make sure that Jimmy Butler gets back some of that money. Because you're right, if he were to serve this 7-game suspension, at its worst, it costs him more than $2.3 million. So the grievance is really going to be to get as much of that money back as possible. It's not going to shorten the suspension any. Excuse me. These grievance processes, they're very time consuming, and the 7 games are going to elapse way before they even get to the grievance process. So the grievance part of this is really only to deal with the financial side of it. Jimmy Butler is going to be out for at least the next 7 games, and then we stay tuned to see what happens next.
Oh boy, the South Beach drama unfolding when it comes to Jimmy Butler, him being suspended by the team for 7 games for conduct detrimental to the team, could be losing up to $2.35 million. Pat Riley, that's not the guy you want to play chicken with, because he will sit there and play with you all you want. You want to play games with Pat Riley, Riles will sit there and play with you in your face until somebody blinks, and usually it's not necessarily him.
All city like the mayor.